anything that is an echo of that trauma that has gone very deep and frozen in us, is not processed in us. So it still exists in time because it was never worked through.
I'm Andrea from Fight for Your Life. We are making this recording and this channel, Fight for Your Life, as a step one for people in their trauma recovery, to support them to understand if they have trauma, what it looks like, why give a shit, what do I do about it, how do we calm ourselves the F down. A lot of people that I've come across in my life don't even realize that they have trauma, let alone how that plays out and affects their relationships, their mental health. It's something I really, really care about. So we're making something to fix the problem. And here is my friend. You can do it like this because it's YouTube, Garry, who is coming along for the ride with his lots of experience and knowledge to help us on our way. Do you want to introduce yourself, Garry?
So yes, she's right about that. I'm Garry. I have a counselling practice. Actually, you're sitting in my practice right now with me. And I see 10 or 15 people a week. The majority of those people have trauma, even though I never officially advertise. I don't officially advertise myself as a trauma counsellor. That's just the way that's panned out. I'm also a tertiary lecturer, and that includes lecturing in trauma. And yes, I'm glad that Andrea mentioned that many of us don't understand about trauma, because that's the situation I found myself in, both personally but also professionally, because most people who work in my profession, we're trained in talk therapy. Not everybody, mind you, there's a whole realm out there of somatic and emotional practices, but talk therapy prevails. That's how people are trained, unless they do other specialty training. And as we'll discover along the way, talk therapy only goes so far in working with trauma. And as Andrea referred to, trauma is much more prevalent than we understand. And we'll also talk about different types of trauma, because I think many of us just have one form of trauma in mind.
Yeah. And I look forward to unpacking, like even in just that few paragraphs there's so much in there to talk about. And I look forward to unpacking it over some weeks with you.
Yeah, it'll be especially fun if we can use swear words like you've already started to do.
I'm a bit sweary.
Yeah, that's all right.
Sometimes I think that I'll try not to be so sweary, but then I forget because I've got ADHD. So it's unfortunate.
Okay. Yes.
So for my part, in terms of my interest in this and doing it, starting it, I have had some trauma experiences through childhood, which set me up for some patterning throughout my adult life. And in my early 20s, I started therapy because I was yelling at my son, and I didn't want to be yelling at my son. I'd said that to myself as a child, I'm never going to be like my parents. And then I was like, I can't even control this, which sent me off to therapy. Also, I want to be a youth worker to support other people to not end up, having the same kind of experiences. And also, I had a few really good adults in my life growing up, and I guess I wanted to be one of them for other people. That makes sense. I had really good teachers, a couple of them. So I started therapy in my early 20s, and I remember saying to a therapist, I'm like, if I budget, look at my watch, it's not on. If I budget a couple of years to this, I should be able to have an all right life. And she said, how many years have you had trauma for? I was like 18. She said, well, you probably need about that many to unwrap it all. And I was like, what? No. So I've had a lot of therapy since my early 20s. And as you were saying, a lot of that's talk therapy because that's what people are trained in. But over the last year and a half, 2 years, I've had some experiences that don't involve talk therapy. And I feel like I've come a lot further in my journey as a result of somatic work and out of the box stuff. So we'll talk a bit about that as well. So my interest comes from my own experience, but also having spent many years working with people as a youth worker and in fitness. And my intention with my fitness business, my pole studio, was to bring the two together so that we can heal our bodies. And we also heal our bodies with fitness, in some ways. So that's my sort of thing. And you've explained yours. I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to add, because we're going to get into in a minute, what is trauma?
Well, so that's a good prompt. And maybe I could ask you, when you went, did you say you were 18 or so when you went to in your 20s, I think you said, when you
early
initially
20s.
went
I think
for help.
I was probably 19 or 20 when I first started.
And did you already know to use the word trauma in describing your life? And if so, what did you think you were talking about?
I don't think I used the word trauma. I knew that I had been through abuse. That's what I knew. And I'd read books in the library about what happens to people. And I was like, I'm not going to be one of those. So I was quite determined to not become a statistic as a result of my experience. I guess we're all statistics of one kind, though, aren't we? But I need to find that some of it I really felt, I really had no control over, and it wasn't only until learning certain things, the control that we do have is to make the choice to heal. But no, I didn't know the word trauma.
Yeah.
I don't think.
And we should park that control over, because that's quite a significant little thing, and it's a bit of a defining element of trauma.
I'll make a note, make sure we come back to it, because it's something I'm actually quite passionate about. And there's because some people are like, well, you just have to make a choice, and we will unpack this later. As you said, it's actually so much more complicated than that. So just know that.
It is indeed. And I think now you just have to make a choice. Probably follows under that lovely sort of recent, almost a cliche now, when we talk about blaming the victim. It's taking a similar stance, isn't it? Well, you're a drug addict. You just need to make a choice not to be a drug addict. Well, what we know now is A, that's not a very simple choice. And B, that's not a very simple choice because, as Gabor Mate, one of the leaders in the field, would say, that almost certainly comes out of a traumatic past. The fact that you're an addict in the first place, and that's not so easy to shift. And yes, we don't just make choices to stop. As you said, we can make a choice to make the intention to heal, as opposed to making a choice to keep dulling our inner pain.
It definitely takes courage. I think I wrote a book about 10 years ago, and in that talked about, and I explained it to lots of people back then. I need to, I guess, discover that I had a lot more work to do, but said that, like, the only way to get out of the fire is actually through the fire. There's no other way. You're going to be sitting in the fire, just dulling it, pretending you're not there with, alcohol or workaholism or whatever. I literally forgot what I was saying. Do you remember? I got distracted when someone came into your room. Hi.
Yeah, sorry about that. That's real life though, folks, right?
That's totally fine. Let's talk about trauma. What is it? Do you want to start, or shall I talk about what I think it is? Big T, little t?
Yeah, jump in.
We have some notes, but we thought we'd use our energies and knowledge and trust ourselves. Okay, so to me, trauma. And I guess one thing to note, and I'll put this in a disclaimer, is topics may come up that could be triggering. So we won't ever go too deep and nasty, but there might be words that get used. So probably don't listen to this around children. Capital T trauma, big T trauma is, to me, big things that make you feel really, really powerless. Like you literally have no control over, you cannot get out, or like you're about to die. So literally being about to die or thinking you're dying is a capital T trauma. Being hurt by people who are supposed to keep you safe is a capital T trauma in any kind of way, like, physical assault, sexual assault, all those. They're big, the big ones. The little t traumas actually still affect our lives, but a lot of people don't understand. And I'll use the example I gave when we were chatting. Dr. Gabriel Mate gives the example of his very loving mother, who wouldn't hurt a fly. He was a baby in the Holocaust, and the experience of his brain forming and his knowledge and safety senses forming as a little baby around a really, really stressful environment. So his mum and dad would have been really, really stressed. The world was really, really stressed. And so growing up like that, like imagine growing up as a child through that. You know, your sense of safety would be like that. Or, you know, I was watching Dairy Girls and thinking about what Ireland would have been like through, I don't know what the word is for that thing that happened in Ireland.
The Troubles.
Yes. Yeah. So you might not have had someone hurt you, but you've grown up at a time of real uncertainty. That feels like a capital T trauma to me. So there's lots of things that happen in our lives that you go, oh, but that's nothing. Like maybe your parents weren't present. That's what we were talking about, workaholism. You've grown up with a parent who's an alcoholic or something like that, but maybe they never physically hurt you, but they weren't able to be around there for you. So those little T traumas pervade our lives and affect our relationships with others, including our children and partners. That's all I've got to say about that.
Yes. So the textbook definition folk would agree with you. Yeah, I know. It's pretty impressive, eh? So when you talk about that feeling unsafe, that is the key to the experience of trauma. And that's when we will at some point talk about neurobiology in layman's terms, but we all know the response when we're feeling threatened. We have a fight, flight, or freeze response. There's some other derivations on that now, but mostly we can talk fight, flight, and freeze. So this is the difference. Our bodily instincts take over when we feel threatened. And that's the defining difference between, we all have adaptive mechanisms from when we're young. We have a grumpy parent, for example, or a depressed parent, and we learn to find our way around them. Some of those behaviors can become very deeply ingrained as well, and we have to sort them out. But the traumatic experience is quite different in that it's a physiological response. We don't have control over our physiological responses. Even in fact, whether we fight, flight, or freeze is a bodily, our body just responds as it will. We might like to have fought when we were attacked by somebody else. Afterwards, we might beat the crap out of ourselves for not having beat the crap out of them. But our body might go into a flight or a freeze response.
Yeah. And the thing that I find as someone, like I have diagnosed complex post-traumatic stress disorder, which is good to know. But I think, you know, the reality is a lot of people have triggers and undiagnosed trauma. But what I find particularly challenging about triggers being fight, flight, freeze, fawn. Fawn is when you like placate to keep yourself safe. So you're going to people please and placate. You don't know what one's going to pop out. So I've had times where I have gotten angry at people. And then there's times where I wish I got angry, which is like what you just described, but instead I froze. And I actually do know how to look after myself, but I froze. And that is difficult. But over the years, my personal work has been to find the space between stimulus and response. For there, we have, I don't know what the word is. It's control of some kind, but Viktor Frankl says it better. Freedom and control. Of course, I said control. Anyway.
Yes. And that, you know, since you bring that up, that's the fundamental difference between cognitive behavior therapy, which is pretty prevalent because that's what psychologists are trained in, and trauma. So with cognitive behavior therapy, we are taught that there's this little framework called the ABCs, the antecedent, which is the triggering event, and the C is our response, whether it's an emotional response or a bodily response to it. And in between the A and the C is the B, which is our belief or beliefs about the triggering event. You know, somebody shouts, you know, if I'm in an office with just partitions and open office and somebody down, you know, 2 or 3 cubicles down shouts, I cringe because I feel like I might be in trouble. So
like
if I grew up in
automatic reaction.
Yeah. Yeah, that's my reaction. That's the right word for that. But it's not necessarily a traumatic response, because I can work with that in one or two ways. I might find out that in fact it's a traumatic response. That's a very delicate bottle you've got going there, Andrea.
Yep.
Fine china. So we've probably all, one way or another, worked with cognitive behavior therapy in effective ways, because I think it happens quite naturally sometimes.
Mm.
So in therapy, then, if I went to a cognitive behavior therapist because I'm an emotional wreck, because there's always somebody shouting in the office and I'm always jangling, I can learn that just because someone shouts, it doesn't mean I'm about to get hit, right? And in fact, cognitive behavior therapy would have me go out and test these responses. So tomorrow, if somebody shouts in the office and I have the same response, what is the evidence to suggest I'm in trouble in any way? And there'll be no evidence. So over time, we learn to change our thinking in order to change our responses. And it's the belief we're working with.
However, I think that what I think we were saying before is, if it's actually a traumatic reaction, the wound of the original trauma is what you need to heal, because you're not ever going to handle someone yelling unless you have that wound. And that's off track, on track, but that's what I found really frustrating about CBT. And that's only when I learned that I needed to heal the actual wound instead of putting a Band-Aid on at the surface. It's okay. I was constantly in my head. It's okay. You're safe.
Yeah.
The evidence, check the evidence. What's the evidence? Check the evidence. You're safe, twitch. You know, like, didn't work. For years, I felt ashamed for that, but it does work in some things. Like if it's not a trauma thing, it works. Or perhaps as you heal your wounds, and that might come into play, you know, or trying to reframe something to calm yourself down. But anyway, high horse.
So we should just remind people this is a real life conversation, right? So there's nothing polished. So when I go like that when she's talking, that's because that's what I would do. So, but that's a really good opening. And if I could talk about when I woke up to the realization of, you've already talked about complex PTSD or complex trauma, as we'll often say, probably because it's easier. So if I could just talk about my first client. May I do? No, it's not my first client. It's the first time that I had cause to look beneath the surface of things and say, what the hell's going on here? So I've been around for a long time. I've been a counselor for over 20 years, and I've been a lecturer in counseling for over 20 years. And I've taught counseling theories, for example, many times. And the word trauma, I was certainly familiar with, and a definition of trauma I could have lived with. I mean, I'm conversant with. We should also mention here that complex trauma and developmental trauma is a form of complex trauma. That is the most prevalent kind of trauma we now know, and it's not in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Health Illnesses, the DSM it's called. So it's not actually listed yet as a mental illness. It is now, as of this year, in the international version of the DSM, and it will no doubt be in the DSM soon. However, that is what we're talking about here. So in my practice, this man came one time. He's a lovely man. Well, he was a blokey man. I like him, which is why I say he's a lovely man. And he's in his 60s, and he still gets in fistfights, and he hates himself for it, right? So this is not a lack of willingness to curb himself. He's what's the word for it? He's a worldly man. He's a respectable man, and this is his great flaw, shortcoming. He cannot contain himself whether he's out in public or on his phone or whatever, but when people behave in certain ways, he cannot move beyond. So that's what I'm talking about. He can't rationalize, this guy's really pissing me off. I better take a few deep breaths or maybe walk out now and just, avoid what's coming next. He's right in there. And so, I go down the CBT track, wondering what it is, when people are in this situation that he can't control. And so I work with him for a while, but nevertheless, he comes back week after week, having had yet another incident. At the same time, I have a couple of friends and we get together and have deep and meaningful conversations. And this thing called complex PTSD comes up in conversations occasionally. So I start thinking along a different. And so then I realized, oh, actually, this man cannot control. This is a fight, in his case, fight response. He cannot go from a triggering event to his rational brain because it's trauma. And that's the difference there. So, and then I think I'd better actually start learning about trauma because he's coming every week. So I start doing workshops in internal family systems, which, as you would know, Andrea, Bessel van der Kolk, in his very famous book called The Body Keeps the Score, he writes a chapter, and in that chapter he says internal family systems is probably the best way to work with complex trauma. Yes, internal family systems is
so
the
the
child.
Bessel's shouting out.
That's right. Anyway, there's a couple of power hitters there in those two names. So anyway, I think week by week I'll do this study and try to stay one step ahead of this fellow. Well, I was new in the field, but anyway, what that led me to was a realization that of the clients I could think about who I felt I didn't have enough of an impact on in a positive way, I thought back about them and I realized, yeah, I can see that now. I can see that now because, of course, you get to know about people's early years because it's one of the directions that we go in. So I can see, yes, developmental trauma there, or maybe it doesn't happen at home, but they go through a few years in school of severe bullying where they just have to show up for school every day. They have to hide at recess time. They have to try to be invisible in the classroom. And then they have to make it home as unscathed as possible. So that can lead to complex trauma. So that's the kind of trauma that happens. There are numerous incidents over prolonged periods of time so that a person feels unsafe over periods of time. That's what gives rise to complex trauma. And when that happens in the very earliest years, as Andrea has referred to, that's then called developmental trauma, which is a form of complex trauma. And I thought back from my very own early years. I grew up in a very poor, uneducated area, very beautiful, Eastern Canada, very beautiful area. But I would think about people who ended up as addicts or people whose lives ended up shortened by one means or another, other than natural causes. And I think, oh yes, I remember, the bruises on some of the members of that family, or I remember the extreme anger that consumed my close friend who became a drug addict. Yeah, so I see that that's always been there, and I didn't know about it for a very, very long time.
Yeah, I have a psychologist, and because normally you're not meant to do other stuff, like psychologists be like, no, just work with me kind of thing, to test and measure and support. But he's like, yeah, it's fine to go and do other things, but he's totally often interested about things that, stuff we're talking about here, like IFS and stuff. I just feel there's a lot of people that aren't aware. You were saying about that guy, so you were learning stuff and things about trauma to stay ahead of him. I don't know if this is too bold of a question, but with your learning, did you end up getting to help him prevent the fisty fights?
I don't think that he's had any fist fights lately.
That's good.
He's had other traumas as well. So the original trauma we became very clear about. He had never told anyone else about it. And a part of his shame was that when he was out in public with his very nice family, including siblings and his mother, that was a very embarrassing thing for him. And that's why he really wanted to work with that. I think that he has curbed that. The anger is very consuming for him. So to some extent, let's say, he at least has someone to talk to, and that's been very helpful. And he's been able to help his family finally understand, because nobody knew where this came from. There was a prolonged period of abuse in his life that nobody else knew about.
Yeah, and it's hard when that trying to educate people when so many people think just make a choice, or I read a quote and hopefully I saved it somewhere. I remember when I was first diagnosed with complex PTSD and then learning how it came about, and it kind of made me worse to begin with in that. And what the quote was along the lines of like, it's something along, first you have the information and then the grieving,
Right.
Anger and grieving, like for the life that, hang on a minute, if that hadn't happened, then that wouldn't have happened.
Yeah.
And you're piecing it together, you're kind of reeling in shock and triggering yourself almost. And my son was like, since you've been diagnosed, it's like you're getting into it. Like, he was only young, I was in his mid to late teens, maybe the more mid. And that hurt a lot, but it took a while to be able to, him and I have really good conversations now to explain that. I didn't even know I had this and the cost that all these things have had in my life. And now I also understand it more. And so then when you know what you have and that it's actually okay to cry and you're supposed to cry and you're supposed to do these things, you sort of like, then you have to learn how to cry. Like I stopped myself from crying from a young age. So there's that part of educating people where they're like, well, now can't you just stop it? Oh, like now you've got ADHD, can't you just be on time? No. Like I'll try, tablets help. But once you know what you've got and there's a name for it, and this is really, really important. Because I know that some people might watch the start of this and go, oh, so you're just giving people an excuse. You've been through trauma, so now you get to blah, right? And a lot of people, and I've had that said to me, and I'm like, no, now you know what it is. It is therefore your responsibility, as far as I'm concerned, for myself especially, I'm not here to tell anyone else what to do, to minimize your footprint on the earth. Stop being like, if we're undiagnosed, untreated, we're the walking wounded, walking around hurting all these other people and ourselves. And once we know, then we can start to repair and stop hurting other people. And we have to know to be able to repair. And that doesn't even mean it's going to be perfect all the time.
Yeah.
Like I literally have been rewiring my brain with a certain technique called EMDR, which we'll talk about techniques another day. And I do lots of work to prevent myself from getting triggered. And I could literally have an EMDR boot camp and rewire a whole lot of my brain. And then something will happen one day and I'm still going to get triggered and I'm still not going to be able to control it. So it's like going control what you can, accept what you can't. But, do your best every day. So I don't know. I just wanted to say that it's not an excuse to misbehave, so to speak.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one of the ways that I've heard that framed, I'd like to attribute the source where it belongs, but I don't remember any longer where I first heard it. But, there's this long-standing nurture-nature debate. How much of us is from our nurture and how much do we bring with us is our inner nature? And the thing about developmental trauma, and I think it's a comfort, or it should be a comfort, is the realization that actually we're talking about nurture, not nature. Yeah. Because it's what was done to you. I also will qualify that statement over time because I don't like the whole notion of victimhood at all. But nevertheless, it's our environment and individuals in our environment that caused the trauma. And because a lot of individuals carry a lot of shame, and shame we carry about ourselves. It's not about situations, but we define ourselves through shame. And we are not defective people. People who have developmental trauma, it's not about them. And that's an important distinction.
Yeah. Yep. I get what you mean. Yeah. So anyone listening, it's not your fault. So many people talk about this too. I can't even think of the phrase, how to put it either. It might not be your fault. responsibility.
Yes, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
There was another thing I saw lately. It was an interview. I was just following up a particular doctor. I guess we'll give people resources of videos and things that they can look at, won't we? And this is one of those people who does a very inspiring video, Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris. And but anyway, I was just following up other things with her, and she had an interview with Oprah Winfrey. I might have mentioned this to you, Andrea. And this interview was at the time of Oprah putting out a new book, not very long ago, I think. Now, people might not know, or they might know that Oprah Winfrey had a very traumatic childhood, and she now sponsors a number of residential schools in Africa for girls who otherwise wouldn't have decent clothing or food or a place to sleep, never mind an education. And so this book, which she was being interviewed about, it's called What Happened to You? And she called it What Happened to You in order to make the distinction between what's wrong with you and what happened to you. So that's her way of saying the same thing, that it's nurture, not nature.
Yep. Now, we could probably wrap up soon, but I would like to just we touched on it a little bit. We can probably do this one we talked a little bit about trauma response versus a normal response. I think we kind of talked about it. It just had a few points we wanted to touch on. And then the other one was, what does it actually look like? Where should we go?
Do we want to do one of those things today? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Maybe we can finish up with what it looks like. So we've talked a bit about where it comes from. How does it present now as a grown-up? So we talked about that guy kind of accidentally getting into fights. That's one thing. And if we just, we'll talk more about this in more detail another time, but the internal family system stuff, this is probably a really good way to articulate what does trauma look like now, because it looks like being a workaholic and not being able to connect with your kids properly. It looks like pushing your kid off your lap when they want to connect, but you have some kind of wall. It looks like drinking too much too often. It looks like, when you've had a stressful day, doesn't it just make a lot of sense to have a drink of wine? But actually, we're trying to dull our feelings. So that's a trauma response, probably.
Yeah.
What else does it look like?
Well, it looks like any of the manifestations when we talk about fight, flight, and freeze. And so there's this particular notion called the window of tolerance, which we should make available as well. And we can speak to the window of tolerance, but that goes into, when we get triggered. So let's talk about if we have that original trauma, anything that is an echo of that trauma that has gone very deep and frozen in us, is not processed in us. So it still exists in time because it was never worked through. So anything that hits that button is going to make us feel just like we felt right back then, take us right back into that unsafe territory. That will skyrocket us from, just cruising along in our everyday to having a fight, flight, or a freeze response. So those responses or fawn, it is a legitimate response that you mentioned earlier.
It saved my ass a few times.
So we can talk about the fight flight taking us into hyper arousal. And so when you talk about, yes, my engine is always revved, that's the hypo arousal, lots of energy, also lots of anxiety, lots of anger and aggression. My clients sitting in my room, I can feel their buzz. So they're the go, go, go. They get things done. That's a great positive thing about them. They can't settle in the present moment very comfortably.
It's really hard. I'm thinking I might have just cut you off. Sorry. I bought a hanging egg chair a couple of weeks ago. Right. I've wanted something for years and years. I've wanted something just to rock in because I know that it helps down regulate.
Right.
Like if I'm always up, right? You've seen it.
So that's hyper arousal.
Yeah, absolutely. But the thing is, if we're in that state and we don't bring ourselves down, we're more prone to, for me, at various times in my life, I've drunk to calm down, right? If I can bring myself down a notch, won't be as prone to, one, poor coping mechanisms, two, actually getting triggered. Because if I'm up here all the time and then something happens, I go poof,
Yeah.
But if I'm down here and something happens, it's just a little, I noticed that, as opposed to, so rocking helps. It took me weeks to sit in my chair. It took me weeks. I only sat in it the other day. It took me like 3 weeks. My body just resisted it. I just was looking at it.
Right.
It's like, go sit in your damn chair.
Yeah, that's really good. So we will also come to, that's a way for you to down regulate, and there are other strategies for getting back into this, what's called the window of tolerance, where we can be okay again. And just in terms of what it looks like, so the fight flight responses both have to take us into hyper arousal. So one of them might be, the flight thing might be literally running away. Were you going to say something?
You keep talking. Just pretend that I'm still here. My battery's running low, so I'm actually slide my table down toward a PowerPoint while you explain what you're doing.
Yeah.
Go on.
So the other response that I was going to mention, other than the fight and flight, is what people would know as the freeze response, and that takes us down in energy. So I think of it as flatlining. I don't know if people remember that movie. I think it was called Flatliners with Kevin Bacon, I think a very long time ago, and maybe Kiefer Sutherland. Anyway, so these are the people whose energy is very flat, very low, disconnected from their passions, often very stuck. Those people are in hypoarousal. So that's another manifestation. What does trauma look like? These are people who just can't lift themselves up and make an investment in things, have an opinion about things, not willing to put themselves out, to be ambitious, to have emotions, flatlining.
That's actually really good to hear, and people can have both.
Yes.
And there's no, like, I found it, I remember a good few years ago, I was in a pretty high time of stress. And I had, in 1 week, I had 2 very different reactions to a very similar stimulus. Being a big man was very disrespectful and mean, nasty, changed his tone, aggression. In one situation, I actually entirely froze and couldn't speak at all. And then another time I lashed out right back at him.
Yeah.
And looked like a crazy person a little bit.
Yeah.
And I remember after that being so bewildered, I was like, wow, I really don't know what's coming.
Yeah. So again, we'll go into greater depth into these things, but the fight flight responses, the hyper arousal is maintained initially through adrenaline, but through cortisol mainly. So we keep on this particular buzz, but we can suffer from adrenal fatigue, and then we can crash and flatline. So that's not uncommon. We can opt for, like, I kind of think of a radical solution. So for example, some people who go into the freeze mode, so that's particularly true of young children who are abused at home. They might try to fight, they might try to flight, get the hell out of there one way or another. But in the end, those things don't work for children because they're pretty much captives in their environment. So in the end, it's this dissociation, which is a part of the freeze response, and just trying to be invisible. That can be a radical solution. Those are the people who might never lift themselves out of that energy that keeps them flat. Those are the people who in their teenage years will do self-harm things like cutting, the things to let them know that actually they're alive, feel the intensity in their body. Yeah, so that's also, we can talk about borderline personality disorders. That often comes out of that kind of early abuse. Yeah. And when I say things like that, I don't want for people to say, yeah, those are labels, and we're talking about them as symptoms of trauma. And I think that's very important to recognize. And And, you know, in the end, I have a worldview that I just need to accommodate. These things happen. In my worldview, we could say they're unfortunate in that you wouldn't wish them on anyone. But ultimately, I think that there's a reason for everything. That's just a part of my worldview. And I don't mean to be cold about that, because I know some people would like to throw China at me when I say that.
When I was
But
younger, I would have been one of them, but I'm with you.
yeah, I understand that. I think also there are people, and there was one in a workshop I was teaching at the weekend who underwent a lot of trauma, and she is at the stage now of what we can call post-traumatic growth, where she realizes her life never would have had the depth of meaning that it has because of the trauma now. But again, I think a lot of people carry on with trauma without knowing it, who've had very difficult pasts, and that's no comfort to them. But as you say, it is our responsibility in the end, but even before that, which is a part of what we're trying to do, I think, is to help educate people, to help understand who has trauma and what can be done about it.
Yeah. And I guess I would say two things. One, I think I was one of those people, I think you've said it, you know, we'll always be healing and growing and stuff, and that's okay. But I remember like a few years ago, I thought, oh, yep, I think I've got it sorted. And then definitely didn't. And was in my early 20s, someone said something similar. And I was like, fuck off, mate. Like, oh yeah, this got purpose, does it? I chose like some kind of choice kind of thing. That's a big other thing, but let's not talk about that right now. But there is Viktor Frankl talked about it in his book, Man's Search for Meaning, literally being a doctor who was imprisoned in the Holocaust, who was then taken out and made to do things as a doctor that he didn't want to do. And watching people in the camps, some were okay and some weren't okay. I think he was a psychologist. I can't remember, but he was observing in the camps who was okay and who wasn't and why, what they were doing. And one of his biggest things is meaning making. And when I was younger, the thing that kept me going was there's a lesson in each day. If I can learn and grow, there's a lesson in each day. You know, I think we talked about that when some people with trauma struggle with gratitude as a concept. Let's look at what went well, what we learned. So I guess I just say it as a beacon of hope to other people. And it is what keeps me going. And I actually do mean it. Like I said it to someone the other day, and I felt like crying when you just said that. That was the immediate reaction. Would I change my life? And if you know me, you know I've had a bit of a rough trot. And I wouldn't, because I said to this person, what I've been through is how I see you in my periphery, and I know you're not okay, and I gently follow out the door, or I'll gently come alongside you, or I'll know that you need to be wrapped in something soft right now, you know? And I've got this amazing superpower that can see people, and I wouldn't be able to do that if I hadn't felt all of those things. And I have a lady, she's had a bit of a rough time, and she was one so long ago. I had my big white fluffy dressing gown here, something happened, and I just literally went and got my dressing gown. I'm like, is it okay to just wrap you up? And I just put it around her, and then she just sort of folded, and she said, this is why I love it here. And I just held her for a hot minute, you know, and wrapped her up in fluffiness. And then, and I've had but she's, I just wouldn't be able to do that, you know? And so taking meaning from the things that happen is okay. Like, how can you turn it into gold? You know, anyway, that's me over and out. I think anything else we can probably touch on. Did you have anything else you wanted to say?
No, in terms of this is the first of our talks. And I guess, are you doing an intro, or have you written up something where people might be able to eventually ask questions of us or pick up some resources and so on? You've got all that under control.
I wouldn't say under control, but it's working on it.
She's a very capable woman. She's one of these people with, well, she calls it superpowers. She can do 1,000 things at once.
And sometimes also I nap. No, we have a TikTok that I never go on because I'm too old, but I will do things on there, like read poetry. We have Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. There's not much on those places. We have a website and it just has a form on it so that you can stay tuned. I also have another business, which is a pole and fitness studio, and I'm working on that as well. So I've been kind of struggling to manage both, funnily enough.
Oh, really?
As
Oh.
Superwoman. But there's something in my life lately, we've tried, this is our third time recording because I stuffed up the first two, but I'm really driven with this because I just see around all the time, so many people need it. And I'm like, and this is why we're making Fight for Your Life. So yes, there are channels. Yes, you can reach out. I'll put them in comments. If you do have questions, reach out. We're just here to help people find their way and lessen their footprint on the earth.